Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your 5-time Grammy loser Tabitha, and today we are covering Season 2, Episode 13, Everything Else You Can Steal. This episode was shot at the end of October into early November 1971, and it aired December 16th, 1971. The story and the teleplay were both by Roy Huggins, and it was directed by Alexander Singer. Singer has already directed the episode How to Rob a Bank in One Hard Lesson, and he's going to go on to direct plenty more during the rest of the series. Our guest stars this week include the late, great Jessica Walter as Louise Carson. You probably remember her as the Bluth family matriarch Lucille Bluth from Arrested Development, a role she was absolutely brilliant in. I love Arrested Development so much. You may also know her from Archer. She had the really mean but hilarious mother roll down, didn't she? Before all that, though, she had a steady career on Broadway. She was the villain in Play Misty for Me. She was James Garner's co-star in Grand Prix. She was even the villain in a made-for-TV movie, or maybe it was a failed pilot, I can't remember, version of Doctor Strange. She had a recurring role on Trapper John as Trap's ex-wife Melanie. And she was in an episode of It Takes a Thief. I bring that up because we actually haven't seen that show in a while, have we? She won an Emmy for the limited series Amy Prentice in 1975. She was nominated for Best Guest Star in her episode of The Streets of San Francisco. She was nominated again for Trapper John. And she was nominated one time for Arrested Development and didn't win, which I'm pretty sure is an actual crime, and I would like the Emmys arrested. Oh, one more thing. Remember that weird puppet show from the 90s, Dinosaurs? Yeah, well, she was the mom in that too. What a career. The point is, I love her. I think she was a very gifted comedic actress. This ASJ episode is one of the few times I've seen her play someone nice, as a matter of fact. She passed away in 2021 at age 80. Next we have Ann Sothern as Blackjack Jenny. Sothern started out as an extra in the film industry. She eventually signed contracts with both Columbia and RKO, but was relegated to B Pictures that did nothing to help her career. She finally caught a break when she signed on with MGM and got the film Maisie, which spawned a whole series of movies. When film work dried up, television was taking off. She starred in a long-running series called Private Secretary, which ran from 1953 to 1957. She followed that up with the self-titled show, The Ann Sothern Show, a comedy about an assistant manager of a hotel. That one ran from 58 to 61. And then, no kidding, she was the voice of the mother car ghost thing in My Mother the Car. She was nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in 1988 for the Lillian Gish movie The Whales of August, and after that she retired. She passed away in 2001 at the age of 92. Next is Patrick O'Neill as Kenneth Blake. You might know him as the captain in Under Siege. You know, that movie that Tommy Lee Jones kindly carried for Steven Seagal. He was also in movies like The Way We Were, The Stepford Wives, and The Stuff. He was in one of my favorite Night Gallery segments of Fear of Spiders. Everyone makes fun of that because the spider looks fake. So what? Your spider looks fake. And he did an episode of The Ann Sothern Show. How about that? He had a couple of short-lived shows too. The first was called Dick and the Duchess, about an American insurance agent living with his wife in London, and her family doesn't like his being a low-down American. I would say that's fair, but they're English, so they have no room to judge. The second was a series called Kaz. That one is about a criminal-turned-criminal attorney. Yeah, that one might be okay. It kind of lines up with shows that I like. Early in his career, he found success on Broadway with shows like Night of the Iguana and The Far Country. He served in the Air Force in World War II, and late in his career was in 2 Perry Mason TV movies. He passed away at age 66 of complications from tuberculosis in 1994. And finally, we have David Canary as Sheriff Coffin. Canary was a big soap actor. His first career on IMDb was a stint on Peyton Place. He also did a stint on The Doctors, and later on he spent decades on All My Children. Also, he notably replaced Pernell Roberts on Bonanza. He played the ranch hand Candy after Adam fucked off to wherever. Okay, there was actually a couple seasons between Adam leaving and Candy joining, but still, he's not Adam, so I hate him. Meh. He guest starred on The Rookies, SWAT, Kung Fu, Law & Order, and Touched by an Angel. And according to IMDb, he was the great-great-nephew of Calamity Jane. Crazy. He passed away in 2015 at age 77. This episode is another recycled Maverick script from the episode Point Blank, but honestly, I think this episode is closer to a different ASJ episode called 10 Days That Shook Kid Curry. That seems like a remake of Point Blank, but whatever. Anyway, let's do it. We do not start on a sneak peek this week. We begin with a shadowy figure robbing a bank in the middle of the night. The man makes a quick retreat. Out on a lonely trail, he meets up with two men who look like discount Hayes and Curry. He informs them that their job is finished, and the men say, but they haven't done anything yet. They've just been hanging around town. Does this mean they're not getting paid? The bank robber says they've both done the job already, and then he shoots them both dead. Harsh. Cue theme song. In the light of day, an exhausted-looking Hayes and Kid ride into town. They water their horses, and Kid wonders if it would really be so bad to get caught and go to prison, because at least he would get a 20-year break from riding a horse. They ease themselves onto a bench, and Hayes opens a newspaper. Their rest is very short-lived because Hayes informs the Kid that they now have to climb back onto their horses. He shows Kid the article he was reading. Kid instantly gets frantic and asks what they're going to do. Hayes says they have to go to that town. And once again, Kid is like, okay, or, hear me out, we turn ourselves in. Ann Southern and David Canary get special guest star credits this week. Hayes and Kid ride for a whole night and arrive the next day in the town of Touchstone. How do you travel at night by horse? Isn't it too dark? Kid sees the sheriff's name is Coffin, and he's taking that as a bad omen. He wants to get a drink. Hayes wants to visit the sheriff first. He says that this is the only sheriff's office in the country that they can walk into with no fear of being recognized. They enter the station and introduce themselves as Smith and Jones, bounty hunters. Aw, you still thinking about Joe, Hayes? Coffin seems kind of disgusted by their careers. He tells him that they've been tracking Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry 300 miles north of where they are now when they heard about this bank robbery. Coffin confirms that it was them and said they got away with over $100,000. They ask how he's certain that it was Hayes and Curry. Coffin says that someone got drunk with the duo one night and they identify themselves to this person, but he doesn't know where they are now. Kid asks who it was who identified them. Coffin won't tell him because that person wanted to remain anonymous. Then he mentions that the reward money is for $10,000. They leave the station and Kid instantly gives up. There goes the amnesty, and we'd better get to South America as fast as we can. Hayes is like, wait a minute. Let's have a drink, and then we'll go to South America. They head over to the saloon and see an old friend of theirs, Blackjack Jenny. They're all very happy to see each other, and they discreetly tell her that they're aliases. And she asks if they couldn't do any better than Smith and Jones. She gets called back to her table, but says she really needs to talk to them, and could they meet her later. That night in her room, the guys have told her about the whole story about being framed for robbing this bank. Jenny kind of already knew that. She tells them that she's only been in town 3 days, and she's there looking for her son Billy, who looks kind of like Kid Curry. She said he and a friend of his, Caleb, came to Touchstone about a month ago. They were the ones claiming to be Hayes and Curry. But she knows they didn't rob the bank either because the safe wasn't blown, it was open, and Billy wouldn't have been able to do that. Billy wrote her saying that he and Caleb were onto something real good, but she thinks Billy and Caleb are dead now. She hasn't heard from Billy in 5 weeks, and Billy always wrote to her every 2 weeks for his entire adult life. If he's gone silent, then he must be dead. That's why she set up a blackjack table in town, so they can try and get information. She's determined to stay until she finds out what happened to her son. Hayes says, well, that makes 3 of us. The next morning, the boys head into the bank, where they meet assistant manager Kenneth Blake, aka the owner's son-in-law. He gets them to talk with the owner, Mr. Blodgett. Unfortunate name. They tell Blodgett that they're bounty hunters, and that they know Hayes and Curry didn't rob this bank. They tell him it must have been an inside job. Blodgett insists that nobody but him knows the combination to the safe. And then Blodgett says he happens to be a deacon in the Baptist church. As someone who was raised super Baptist, he did it. Lock him up. They ask him to reveal the name of the person who identified the thieves as Hayes and Curry, and if he doesn't, they'll just start blabbing all over town about their inside job theory. Blodgett caves. It was a waitress at the local restaurant named Louise Carson. The boys head off for dinner at her restaurant. Louise takes their order, and as soon as she walks away, Kid declares her innocent on account of her being pretty. Kid, how about you let Hayes handle this, okay? When she comes back with their food, they tell her they'd like to talk with her. She obliges them, and they tell her about the whole bounty hunting gig, and then Kid gets in the sickest burn. He says, quote, "We're on the trail of the 2 most vicious criminals in the West, Kid Curry and that other fella." The look on Hayes' face is priceless. Louis says, "Oh, you mean the guys who robbed the bank?" She said she talked to them a little from time to time. They were nice, pleasant young men. To which Hayes replies, quote, Hannibal Hayes and what's-his-name were nice, pleasant young men? Then they let her know that they know she's the one who identified the pair. And she insists, well, that's who they said they were. They were calling themselves Caleb White and Billy Black. Wow, brilliant aliases. Black and White. That's almost as good as Smith and Jones. Then she breezes over this horrifying statement that Caleb came in one night and tried to, quote, make love to me. Come again? What? We're just not going to talk about that? That this man tried to assault her? We just threw that in there and now we're going to ignore it? Jesus, show! Anyway, that night, Caleb told her that he was Hannibal Hayes and his friend was Kid Curry. Louise says she doesn't know for certain that they robbed the bank, but they did leave town that same night. She believes the guys that Caleb and Billy weren't Hayes and Curry, though. She says they never seemed like vicious outlaws to her. Right, except for the attempted rape. Hayes said she could be innocent, but they're gonna have to watch her around the clock. Kid loses a coin toss, so he plants himself in a tree outside her window, and then he falls out of the tree because of 2 feuding cats. He gets back to the hotel room in the morning just as Hayes is shaving. He says nothing happened, and then he lays on the bed and falls asleep. Hayes plucks his hat out of his hands and tucks him in, and it is the cutest goddamn thing I've ever seen. Hayes takes the day watch. He watches her from the porch and then follows her to the bank. Meanwhile, Sheriff Coffin is watching Hayes. Coffin waits outside until he sees Louise leave the bank, followed closely by Hayes. Hayes spots Coffin, nods at him, and then diverts his path. That night, it's Kid's turn again. He's back in the tree, presumably having shot those 2 cats off screen. Meanwhile, Hayes is in the saloon having a drink with Jenny. Too bad Coffin comes and interrupts them. He would like a private word with Hayes. He wants to know why he and his partner are still in town. Hayes says, well, they're looking for a trail. And where is his partner, by the way? You know what? Shut up, Coffin. You're not even a real Cartwright. He leaves and Hayes goes back to talk to Jenny. He basically tells her that Louise is all they have to go on, and if they don't get anything out of her by tomorrow, he and Kid are giving up and headed to South America. Jenny scoffs at them making it in South America. They can't even speak Spanish. Well, sorry, Jenny, they haven't been keeping up with their old-timey Duolingo lessons. Back with the Kid, something actually does happen. Louise leaves her house in the dark. Kid follows her. She goes into a foreclosed house and meets Kenneth Blake. You know, the son-in-law / assistant manager. The 2 start making out, and Louise is very distressed because of the bounty hunters in town. Blake tells her not to worry about it. No one can prove anything. They kiss a little more, and then Louise leaves. Kid watches her and then Blake right away, and then goes back to the hotel. Hayes wakes him up later in the middle of the night and says that they're taking Louise on a picnic the next day. He's got it figured out. He does his best thinking in the middle of the night. Kid, barely conscious, tries to keep up with everything Hayes is saying. Basically, Hayes has theorized that Blake is married to Blodgett's daughter, who is probably ugly, which, rude, you don't know that. So he falls in love with the prettiest girl in town, Louise. I love Jessica Walter, I do. But as she said, quote, I've got just enough looks to get by. I've never pretended to be a great beauty, but I do try and be a good actress, end quote. She is pretty, but she's not the bombshell that this episode tries to make her out to be. Anyway, Blake doesn't want to give up the Blodgett money, so he finds 2 dummies who look kind of like Hayes and Curry, at which point Kid argues that Blodgett said Blake didn't know the combination to the safe. Hayes counters that by saying he's worked there long enough, and he's probably picked it up, a number here, a number there, a little bit at a time, especially since he really wants it. Kid says that would mean Blake did kill Billy and Caleb. He also doesn't like that this means Louise is part of a cold-blooded murder. Well, Kid, like it or not, she might very well be. Louise meets with Blake at the same house again, worried about going on this picnic. She knows that they suspect her, but Blake says he'll be close by if anything goes wrong. But he wants to know what Smith and Jones think they know. Our boys do take Louise on that picnic, the most tense picnic ever, and Blake sits nearby ready to snipe Hayes and Kid if he has to. Jeez. They get to the point with Louise. They tell her that they know about her and Blake. She claims that that's not any of their business. Sure, the affair isn't their business, but the fact that Blake robbed the bank is. She gets defensive until they say that you have to know that Blake killed Billy and Caleb. Well, she doesn't believe that. Hayes bluffs and says that they found their bodies. Louise honestly didn't know about the murders. She wasn't a part of that. She knew about the robbery, but that's it. She was under the impression that Blake was going to give them a little bit of money and send them to South America. They tell her that she has to go to the sheriff. If she tells her story, then she won't be prosecuted. She agrees to go to Sheriff not Adam Cartwright and tell him all that she knows. That night in the saloon, the boys go see Jenny. They have to break the news to her that Billy and Caleb most likely are dead, but they can't tell her everything yet. She just wants the name of the killer. They ask her to wait until morning. But she's not stupid and works out that it must have been Blake. Then the poor woman has to go back to work. How the hell do you put on your customer service face after being told your child has been murdered? In the words of the great Lucille Bluth, I'd cry, but I don't think I can spare the moisture. In the morning, Blodgett opens the bank to find the money returned and an apology letter signed Billy Black and Caleb White. Well, that clears Hayes and Curry. They go to the saloon and talk to Louise again. Turns out she only sorta did the right thing. She said she doesn't believe in killing, and if she turned Blake in, then he would be put to death by the law. She confronted Blake and said he had to return the money and clear Hayes and Curry. She knows they won't go to the sheriff because they're Hayes and Curry. They are so bad at keeping their secret identities, I swear. But this is just weird, gross thinking. She really thinks she has the moral high ground by not turning in a man she knows is a murderer? Really? Just as the boys are about to get on the train, Louise is also heading out of town to Yuma. She promises she won't fall in love with a married man again. It kind of seems like something that should be common sense not to do in the first place, but whatever. As they're talking, Jenny walks toward the bank. The boys call out to her, but she ignores them. They start running towards her, but it's too late. 2 shots ring out from inside. Jenny has taken her revenge. She's killed Blake, and willingly goes with the deputies. She smiles at the boys on her way past. "Oh, good job, Louise. He died anyway. You happy? This make you feel good about your moral choice to let Blake off the hook?" They tell Louise that Jenny was Billy's mother. They ask Louise to stay in Touchstone to help her. If she testifies as to what happened, the jury will understand Jenny's motives and won't convict her. Blake did admit to her when she confronted him that he killed Billy and Caleb, and Louise finally does a decent thing and agrees to stay and help. Good for her. Kid tells her that he's happy that he was right about her all along, and then the boys board the train. Louise tells them when the trial's over she's still heading to Yuma and that they should look her up if they ever get there. They promise they will. In the tag, the boys chat on the train. Hayes asks how much a headstone costs. Kid doesn't understand, and Hayes was thinking about Blake's headstone. He wants the quote on it, "The only thing in life you have to earn is love. Everything else you can steal." Title drop. The end. This is a pretty good episode. I would call it just so-so, but that ending puts it over the edge. It adds a nice layer to it. Jenny didn't need to be in the story, but she's a good reminder that Billy and Caleb were people with loved ones. Or at least Billy was. I don't really care about Caleb, the would-be rapist. I can't blame Jenny for killing Blake. Louise was willing to let him get away with murder due to some weird thinking, in my opinion. But how could a mother live with her child's murderer getting to go free and continue living his life? I don't blame her at all. I wouldn't convict her either if I was on that jury. I would deadlock that jury if I had to. I like the boys' interaction with Jenny too. It's very sweet. There's clearly a lot of fondness and affection between them, and I think the actors had good chemistry. It's kind of a bittersweet ending as opposed to the very bleak one last episode. The line of the episode goes to both of them. It's another exchange. Hayes asks, "Kid, did your mother think you were perfect?" "As a matter of fact, she did. Did yours?" "Yeah, but yours was wrong." "Ooh, get him, Hayes." The episode goes to Hayes. He works out the whole scheme and was dead right about almost all of it. Plus, I like his scenes with Jenny. He's very soft and kind with her. Next time on Alias, Smith & Jones, the kid travels to Mexico and ends up getting accused of murder. It's up to Hayes to clear his name. Or his alias, I guess. Research for this podcast comes from the wonderful book Alias, Smith & Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men by Sandra K. Segala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Thanks for listening.